20th star party of the year. This is the most we've ever done. And the wine, cheese, please enjoy, and cake and cookies and all that. We celebrated our 100th star party since we started this program in '09 back in August. And this is our 109th, and this is the first time we've been able to get together and have a party, so please enjoy responsibly. At the end of Russ's presentation, which is called Santa, Are You Bringing a Telescope for Christmas? With guidelines for Santa on what to bring. At the end of that, I'll get up, I'll hand out what's up tonight, the sky maps for tonight, and talk a little bit about what there is to see. The weather should be clear, and we'll head on up the hill. And until we freeze, we'll watch, well, there won't be any planets up tonight, but there's plenty of wonderful stars and star clusters and all kinds of good things to see. Russ?
Okay, good evening. Okay. Back when I was a corporate worker, we used to have what they called an icebreaker at the beginning of I'd put us through some of that. I figured I'd try one. I never actually tried one before, but and be careful how you answer this, but please tell me what women and telescopes have in common.
Uh-oh.
Now, before anybody blurts out anything inappropriate, let's just say they both help men see things more clearly. And I've got a lot better versions of that, but I don't want to get us banned from White Memorial. Okay, so we're going to talk a little about telescopes. I want to thank all the members for bringing all their telescopes tonight. Thank my wife before I left. So telescopes all have this one thing in common. Okay, no matter what type of telescope it is, they gather more light than your human eye can gather, and then they magnify it. Okay, the larger the aperture or the opening in the telescope, whether it be a combination of lenses or a combination of lenses and mirror, the more light they gather. So it's pretty basic. You want to bring a lot of light in, want to do some serious magnification, you got to have a bigger telescope. Doesn't really apply the way for astrophotography. That's different. You leave the shutter open a lot longer, you can get a lot of light in. So they're kind of two different things. But just to give you an idea what type of light telescopes gather, this is considered a 4-inch refractor. It's actually 100 millimeters. Okay, a 4-inch, any type of telescope, gathers about 200 times what the human eye can gather. Okay, so that's pretty impressive, pretty good. So over here we have an 8-inch telescope, the orange one over here. So 200 times 4-inch, 8-inch, you're probably thinking 400? No, of course not, because we're talking about areas of a circle. So remember math, pi r squared, area of a circle? So this 8-inch telescope will gather 4 times as much light as a 4-inch telescope. So this will gather 800 times what the human eye can. So now you can see when they say something about these 20, 30 meter telescopes, millions of times what the human eye can gather for light. So now while we're on the topic of astronomy math and telescope math, we'll go over some other things that are pretty important, especially when you're going to apply a telescope. And first, anyone that can quickly look at this and memorize all that and tell me what it said later, I'll give you one of these telescopes. But basically, some really simple telescope math. Okay? Every telescope has a focal length. Okay? The focal length is from the primary objective lens or mirror to a point that it focuses all the light rays, a common focal point. Okay? So this telescope is a 900 millimeter focal length. Now, when I go to star parties, one of the most common things that people ask me, especially if I have a big telescope, which I did bring tonight, they say, how powerful is it? How much can it magnify? And I say, what's it doing right now? And I go, about 90. And they're like, 90? And they're like, just crestfallen. I mean, just 90? That big telescope, 90? The truth is, most of the time, most astronomers, visual astronomy, if you're not looking at planets or the moon, you're probably in the 70 to 120 range for magnification. That's because you want to see a larger object, a big star cluster, a nebula. You can't zero in on just a little piece, but you want to see the whole thing. So the high magnification really isn't necessary. The light gathering of a larger telescope will theoretically allow you to magnify things more. So to make it simple, 900 millimeter focal length. Focal lengths are almost always expressed in millimeters, aperture size, inches or millimeters. Now, if you want the actual magnification, you would take the focal length of the optical tube assembly, and you would divide into it the focal length of the eyepiece, because eyepieces have focal lengths too. And so since I was in a charitable mood tonight, I put a 9mm eyepiece here, and I have a 900mm focal length. So who can tell me what the magnification is? Very good, 100. And obviously, if I put an 18mm eyepiece in there, we would have a magnification of 50. I had an 18.2 and a 14.6. I was thinking of throwing up, but I figured I'd be nice. Okay, so you've got aperture size, you've got focal length, magnification, and one other thing that's very, very important that a lot of people don't think about is the focal ratio when they buy a telescope. Because depending on what you use it for, the focal ratio could be critical. So this is 900mm focal length, 100mm aperture. It's an f9. Now people that do photography, f9 is kind of a slow, it's considered a slow scope, slow lens. For astronomy, f6 and below is considered faster. That big white scope over there, it's f3.9, that's a very fast scope. So that one's an f10. Ratio could make a big difference. So next thing I think we do is just talk about the basic different types of telescopes. There's like 3 basic types of telescopes. Okay, and I've got some schematics up there. This one's a refracting telescope. Lens cell up front, eyepiece in the back. The simplest form of a telescope probably, or it could be very complex depending on what you want to do with it. So first ones technically were invented in 1608 by a person by the name of Hans Lippershey, who was German, who moved to Middelburg in the Netherlands. He was given credit for inventing it only because he applied for the first patent. There's like every single country on earth claims they invented the telescope. It's like inventing the Hamburg, you know. New Haven claims they invented the Hamburg, but who knows who invented it. The first person that publicizes it usually gets the most credit. Now the person that really publicized it a couple years later was Galileo. And he was a big self-promoter too. And he actually made a lot of money off that as well and got some prestigious positions because of this telescope. He did improve upon the design. Biggest problem with this type of telescope is that lenses don't bring all the colors of the spectrum to a common focus point. So it has a very bad called chromatic aberration. So especially the old telescopes where people were grinding these lenses by hand, trial and error. The glass itself wasn't a good quality glass. They had all kinds of problems. They'd look at a bright object, they'd look like a big grape, big purple ring around it. And it wasn't until about 1850 that they started putting a couple of lenses up front with different categories of glass. And that got rid of a lot of the aberrations, not all of it. And then in 1893, a person by the name of Cook invented the first triplet. But they weren't really put into production until, another 70 years mass production. So the advantages of a refracting type telescope is that since it's a clear lens in front, there's no what they call central obstruction, okay? You can get very sharp, crisp images, okay? Very sharp, crisp images, especially if it's a quality refractor, okay? Other advantages, they look cool, they look like a telescope. When people see that, I've had this one out on the sidewalk in front of my house, kids go, what is that thing? It's a telescope. That doesn't look like a telescope. So I've heard that before. Okay. The problem with these telescopes is that they're extremely expensive as the size just slightly increases. And I mean extremely expensive. Okay. This happens to be a pretty good quality 4-inch called an ED doublet. It's got a fluorite lens and another piece of shot glass in it. It's a bargain right now for $649. It's on sale. It's normally $769. Okay. If you go to a 5-inch, another $400 or $500. To give you an example, that big scope over in the corner there, that happens to be it's a reflecting type telescope. It's a 10-inch. It's a 10-inch Dobsonian. You can buy that 10-inch for like $600. Enormous light gathering for a 10-inch Dobsonian, okay? If you went to and that includes the mount. If you went to a 10-inch, what they call a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, on a mount, you're talking $2,000 to $3,000, okay? If you went to a 10-inch, what they call an apochromatic refractor, okay? There's 2 companies I know that make them. They're around $50,000. They're 8.5 feet long, weigh 110 to 120 pounds without accessories. You need a $30,000 mount to carry it, because of its long torque arm effect, because it's so long, you need a mount that has twice the capacity as the weight. By the time you're done with everything, you've got $100,000 invested in a 10-inch refractor versus $600. Of course, that won't quite do what the other one will do, but you know, and you're not going to strap that on your back and go somewhere with it either. You're going to need like a moving van for that. So high cost, the worst value per size of aperture by far in a refractor. A lot of nice features. You want like real pinpoint crisp stars, and you don't need a lot of light gathering. Very nice scopes. Okay. Now, next type of scope we're going to talk about is what you call your basic reflecting telescope. In this scope, instead of having a lens up front, we have a mirror down the back. Okay. This happens to be a 6-inch, what they call a Newtonian reflector. And the reason it's called a Newtonian reflector is because a person by the name of Sir Isaac Newton in 1672 made the first practical reflecting telescopes. And I don't know how many of you have read much about Sir Isaac Newton, but there's a lot of scholars that think he was the most intelligent person to ever walk the face of the earth. Okay, Albert Einstein said he was the most intelligent person to ever walk the face of the earth. Had a portrait of him in his study. That's a pretty good endorsement from Albert Einstein. Okay. Now, the advantages of this type of scope is that they tend to be a little shorter because the light rays are bouncing, going down the back and bouncing up to get the focal length. So typically be about the half the length for the equivalent refractor. It's much, much easier to make a mirror than it is to make a lens, especially nowadays. Much, much easier. Now, originally when they first made these, they had a lot of problems because they didn't have aluminized glass or silver-coated glass. They had a material called speculum, which is a combination of tin and copper. If you think about tin, how bright that is, and if you polish tin and copper, it's like, it's not real bright. Also the problem with that was, it was also like a thin piece of sheet metal, so they would deform it, and they'd polish it, and they'd grind it. Okay, and then about 3 months later it would tarnish, and you'd have to polish it again. And there was a person, Sir William Herschel, that made some huge telescopes. He made like 300 telescopes. He made some, 3-4 feet in diameter. He would actually, and they would deform terribly in the cold weather. When the temperature would drop 20 or 30 degrees, they had a whole series of like 100 screws around the outside edge. He'd be running around, tightening and loosening, trying to get the mirror straight. So in the mid-1800s, a person by the name of Foucault, he invented a method of putting a silver coating on glass. And that revolutionized reflectors. So these are the best bang for the buck, without a doubt, for astronomical purposes. They have some drawbacks. They do have what they call a central obstruction. You have a secondary mirror that's up front, so that does block a little bit of the light coming in. It also lowers your contrast just a little bit. But they're excellent scopes all around use and probably the best value there is. Now, the most popular, the third type of scope is called Cassegrain, or actually it's called a catadioptric scope. Okay, the reason it's called, the Cassegrains aren't all catadioptric, but the reason this is called catadioptric is because they want to make up a big word out of 2 other words. So if you're studying light with lenses, it's dioptrics, and if you're studying mirrors reflecting, it's catoptrics. So you add 2 together, it's catadioptrics. Okay, so this is basically a combination of lenses and mirrors. So it's a combination of this scope and this scope. And it's a little easier if I explain it if we look over there, because you really can't see it. So over here, okay, the light's coming in over here. Now in front, it looks like a flat piece of glass. Some people break the corrector plate in front and think they can just get a flat piece of glass and put it in there. That does not work, because actually it's a fairly complex shape, though relatively flat. Some of it's convergent, some of it's divergent, they call it. Okay, and the reason they make it that way is in the back, it has a spherical mirror. It's not a totally parabolic mirror. And too bad Chef isn't here, because he could have pulled out his math CAD and told people the difference between hyperbolic, parabolic, and spherical. But basically, that is like a big set of eyeglasses for the mirror and back. And the light comes in, bounces off a convex secondary mirror, and then usually goes down a tube and out to the eyepiece. Now, the big advantage of this is you can get a pretty large scope with a long focal length in a very compact area. And for hobbyists, this is by far the most common form of telescope, by far. They sell more, this happens to be called a Schmidt Cassegrain. There are 2 other catadioptrics up here, that one over there, this black scope over there also is a Newtonian that has a correcting lens up front. That is called a Max-Sutov Newtonian. And that small one over there is called a Max-Sutov Cassegrain. It actually has a meniscus-shaped lens in the front, has the mirror with a hole in the back, and in the very center of that mirror in the back, they aluminum coat the lens in front. So and they're very interesting. So a lot of people use these for birders. They're multi-purpose scope. And you can see that. You take a look at it later. Just got a aluminized coating in the center of that meniscus-shaped lens. That actually has a focal length, believe it or not, of 1,200 millimeters, that tiny little scope over there. F15. Okay, so those are the basic types of scopes. Like I said, the biggest advantage of this type of scope is that if you can get a 10-inch or 12-inch and it's manageable, okay? This weighs, without all the gadgets on it, this only weighs 12.5 pounds for the optical tube, okay? That's all. Once you get everything on, it's got probably 20 pounds. An 11-inch weighs 27 pounds. So that's still relatively manageable. When you get into something like that, they start getting kind of heavy, okay? And like I said, 11-inch refractor, forget it. You know, you'll have 4 guys carrying on their shoulder like that. Okay, so if you're thinking of buying a telescope, okay, first of all, there's several things you got to consider. The first thing you always have to consider is how much money you want to spend. Okay, obviously anything you want, how much money. If you're not willing to spend, I'd say, well, that reminds me of another reason why telescopes are like women. Because you always seem to spend far more than you originally planned down the road. And you buy the telescope, oh, I need a lens, oh, I want this. My wife says, where is all this stuff? What do you do with all this stuff? I said, well, go on the telescope. I thought you just had a telescope. No, you need lenses, you need little widgets to turn the lenses around. You need things, okay? She's got things too. There's different kinds of things. You know, porcelain, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I don't know why she has all that. Okay. So anyway, so you gotta decide how much you're gonna spend. If you weren't willing to spend like $150 or $200, I would say don't buy a telescope. Okay? And here's what I would buy. I would buy, not an expensive pair, I would buy 7x50 binoculars. Okay? And these binoculars are, I don't know how you pronounce it, Geisker or whatever. But anyways, they got pretty good reviews. Okay? Like 65, 70 bucks or whatever. Couple things to look for, binoculars. Make sure it says fully multi-coated, and make sure it says back 4 prisms, not back 7 prisms. It's a higher quality glass. So these are, and 7x50 is like perfect for astronomy. They have 8x56. Don't go any higher than that. You can't hold them steady. I've got some large astronomical binoculars that it requires a $150 tripod. It kind of defeats the purpose if you just wanted to not buy a telescope. So for 60, 70 bucks, get these and a star chart, you can have a lot of fun, especially in a dark site. Okay. So another rule about telescopes and buying them, never, ever go to Walmart, Kmart, Sears, and buy one. Okay, now Walmart actually sells some higher end telescopes online, but never do that either. Who you have a problem with the focuser, who are you going to call? Sam Walton? Hey, what, they're not going to know anything. Okay, so don't buy any of those cheap. What happens is if you buy a really cheap telescope, okay, you're going to have problems with it. If it's a gift for a child, they're going to have problems with it. Okay, and there's no wow factor involved. It's just a nuisance, and they lose their interest, and a little while later it goes away and ends up in a yard sale or something. Now, I called several different distributors in the last couple of weeks and grilled them on entry-level telescopes and recommendations. And there's one company, a very reputable company, it's called Ocean Photo and Telescope Opt out in California. When I first started talking to the guy, he's kind of like wanted to dismiss me. I said, no, I'm serious. I'm going to do this presentation. I want to know what really happens with all those $100 and $80 telescopes you sell. He goes, well, they're in yard sales 6 months later. What do you think happens to them? I said, we got like 200 of them on your website. He says, that's all people want to spend, we're going to give it to them. He says, I certainly wouldn't recommend one to anybody. So, you know, the focusers are cheap, they wobble. When I was a kid, I had I think it was about 86 millimeter reflecting telescope, like an F9 or 10. So it was this long, skinny tube. The telescope was made in Japan by a company, I think it's called Tawa. And the telescope was fine. The mount it was on, this knuckle mount with these two wing nuts. So almost like you get it, and you have to tighten the wing nuts. And of course, by the time you tighten the wing nuts, it moves and you can't see what you're looking at. And I noticed right away, even though I was only like 9 years old, 8 years old, that when I extended the tripod legs all the way, this thing was wobbling over, because once they were extended where the pivot was, they were horrible, absolutely horrible. So I ended up collapsing it all the way, and I'd kneel in the snow or whatever. And I'd have the back end of the Newtonian probably was in the snow, probably helped cool the mirror off, I don't know. And worked that way. And one thing right now, you're kind of in the golden age of telescopes for amateur astronomy, okay? It's never been cheaper to buy a telescope relative to your income. And the quality you get, I mean, we've got some astro imagers here. Joe does things, and Liam, they do things that with a few $1,000s of equipment that you couldn't have done with $20 million of equipment 45, 50 years ago. The best telescopes in the world, before all the digital age, you couldn't have done that. The telescopes now, people are, oh, Chinese. 25 years ago, it was cheap Chinese junk. Now it's quality Chinese stuff, okay? It's cheap. There's still some cheaper versions, and you always get what you pay for like anything else. But most of the stuff is made in China. And as a matter of fact, if it wasn't for the Chinese, the amateur astronomy hobby would still be something for the rich. Because they actually mass produce, and don't think they're in these dingy little factories. They got high-tech CNC equipment. They lack a little in quality control sometimes, maybe things like that. Two of the main companies, Celestron and Meade, both nearly went bankrupt. Celestron in 2004, Meade in 2013, both rescued by Chinese companies. The Chinese company that bought Celestron is called Cinta. They make all Orion stuff as well. They make the Skywatcher stuff as well. Good quality stuff. I don't know much about the company that bought Meade. It's called Ninjbo Sunny Electronics. They weren't into telescopes before. I mean, Cinta was always a supplier to Celestron before that, so it was kind of a natural transition. And but when I was a kid, my father, when I was like 8 or 9, I had my first telescope. My father had a very good friend that was a multimillionaire Austrian importer. Okay, his wife was Japanese. He brought all the Minoltas into the U.S. originally, years ago. Minolta was the big thing, long before Nikon and Canon. Okay, and he also brings some telescopes in, some electronics, and he really was pushing the Japanese imports. So he went to Japan probably 10 times a year. Brings this catalog, no one's interested in telescopes, brings this big catalog, it's all in Japanese. Gives it to me, he says, pick out some of the stuff you want. He says, I will get it for you factory cost. I will pick up all the shipping, a lot of the stuff isn't even brought into the U.S. I will bring it into the U.S., I'll get it through customs, and I'll deliver it to your house. Factory cost, it'd be about 30% what you'd pay for. I'm all excited, right? So 30%, I pick out like an 8-inch Newtonian with a clock drive and a 6-inch refractor with a 3-inch refractor on the back and all this stuff. So, get the catalog, he's got his calculator, he's converting the yen for my father. Father looks at him and says, is that still in yen or is that? The cheapest one I picked out was like $1,100 in 1968 or so. My father probably made $6,000 a year then. So I remember my father saying, well, you're going to have to wait till you get older. I've overcompensated now. I think that one instance just left a scar on me for life. Now I bought all these telescopes.
That explains it, Russ.
That explains it too, Liam.
Yeah. Hey, I don't have so many.
Okay, so first thing, so we talked enough about money and how much things cost. Next thing you have to think about is what you're going to do with it and who's going to do it. Because if you say, oh, I want to do astrophotography and visual, and you're just starting off, I'm going to say, maybe not. Maybe try a little visual first, because astrophotography can be this really big hole that lots of money gets poured into. And,
Much like boats and women.
Yeah, boats and women, very similar. Yeah. Well, my wife's not here, so I can say this.
You're sinking this ship. Get back to her.
Yeah. Like one little filter could be like $10,000. So anyways, who is going to use it is a big thing, because if you're a family, if you're a family and the parents are going to go out with an 8 or 9-year-old, and if it weighs 35, 40 pounds, it might not be a big deal, You're not going to give a child a 30-pound telescope. Another thing too, there's a couple kinds of mounts we have going on here, We have what's basically called an alt-azimuth mount. just real simple up and down, left and right, okay? This is an equatorial mount, okay? For some reason, manufacturers love to sell Newtonian reflectors to children on equatorial mounts. Not too good, because what happens is, as you spin this thing around, this has to point north. It's not pointing north right now, it's pointing more west. But as you spin this around, the eyepiece can end up upside down. Now, on a refractor, it's no big deal. I just loosen this and turn it. On that, it's a big deal. Okay, now I happen to have used that for video now, so it really doesn't matter. So, my personal recommendations is entry-level stuff. Forget the equatorial mount. I mean, you don't need, equatorial mount is an absolute necessity for astroimaging, or a mount that has some kind of wedge that turns it into an equatorial mount. But for visual, it doesn't mean much. It really doesn't mean much. It just aggravates the situation. Especially for someone like a 9 or 10-year-old. He's not gonna point it towards the North Star. He's gonna point it east or something. He's gonna wonder why, when he uses slow motion controls, he can't track. He's like, I thought this thing's supposed to track. It won't, because the arc is wrong, because he's not pointing towards the North Celestial Pole. So it just complicates things. And another thing too, they have what they call little setting circles for declination and right ascension, okay? Absolutely, totally worthless, okay? They have to be like this big a diameter so you can actually see the degree. That pointer covers about 3 degree lines, okay? So if the moon's, half a degree, 6 moon wide, you're not gonna find anything. You're not gonna find anything. Now over here, I actually put this 11-inch dial on. You can see the degrees. That's just for rough lining up. I can use that. And I have a scope at home. I have an 18-inch dial on. It's really easy to find things. So stay away from the equatorial mounts. Stay away from the real heavy stuff. That's another thing too. The last thing you really got to consider is how portable does it have to be, okay? Because portability is everything. And we happen to have one of the most portable scopes there is. This is Bob, one of our club members owns it. Inside here, and this is 8.3 pounds for the scope and another pound or two. This is a 5-inch version of that Mac Suktoff Cassegrain, okay? And a 5-inch version has quite a bit of light gathering power, 127 millimeters, and it's got a focal length, I think, around 1200 or 1500. Very good optics, very crisp, very lightweight. Bob, where's Bob? There's Bob. When Bob was younger, Bob used to strap 2 of those to his back, climb a mountain to make binoculars on him on top of the mountain. But he's over 29 now, and he'd like something like this to carry around with him. It makes a lot of sense. Now at home, I have an 11-inch version of this, but it's on what they call a CPC style, or double fork style mount, okay? So it weighs about 70 pounds, okay? Now it has to, when you lift it up on the tripod, it's got one pin in the center that's a slip fit. And you've got this thing wobbling on this one pin, and you've got 3 bolts underneath, and you're like holding it like this, and you're like, oh damn! And you're gonna get killed doing this stuff. And I'm not so worried about picking up the 70 pounds, I'm worried about dropping the 70 pounds. That's a couple $1,000 mistake that my wife probably won't let me recover from. She said, you stupid, you broke it, too bad. You got enough other toys, play with them. So I had that scope out 4 or 5 times this year. I had it up at the White Memorial 2 or 3 times. I brought it up to Maine, did 2 star parties at Maine, did another star party in town that I live. And then I said, I've had it. I was so nervous when I was mounting it at the Southington Public Library on their asphalt parking lot by myself. I'm like, oh God, if it goes over, I'm done, So I came home and I have it on a nice rolling mount now. So it just rolls out of my garage, and I just roll it and put the 3 jacks down. Wonderful. It's when I'm mounting it like that and carrying it around, it's a great scope to look through, but it's one of my least favorite scopes in a way. When it's back on its roller, it's one of my favorite scopes. So something to consider.
If I wanted to do stargazing over a planet gazing, there's 2 different kinds
Well,
you should get.
no, you could. Well, some people that strictly want to do like lunar viewing, they call them lunatics,
Not lunatics?
Yeah. So if you were just going to do lunar and planet, but when people say planet gaze, there's really only a couple planets that are interesting to look at. Saturn and Jupiter. About every 5 or 6 years, or next year is going to be great. Mars is going to be like really bright, really big. Right now, Mars is this tiny little dot. Okay, even through a large telescope, there's nothing to see, but come next June, July, you'll be able to see features on the surface of Mars. You'll be able to see the ice caps fine. You'll actually even be able to see the 2 moons, which are usually too dim to see. So that's probably the best it's been since 2003. But no, I mean, this telescope right here, this is an excellent telescope for looking at the moon, for looking at planets, for looking at small, bright star type. So globular clusters, wonderful for globular clusters. Put a low power eyepiece in, you can still get a reasonably wide field of view. So no, it has very sharp images, very crisp.
What telescope is the right telescope for you? It's the one that you will use the most. Okay.
I use them all at the same time sometimes.
I can
He
attest.
does, but the typical person, if it weighs 80 or 100 pounds, you're gonna use it 4 times, and then it's gonna sit in the garage, and then it will end up on a tag sale, as Russ was saying. So think about that before you spend your money.
When you talk about imaging and optical, what are you looking at?
You talking about for money or?
No,
Or scope?
just things that you're doing with the scope.
Well, I mean, I do mostly just visual, okay? I don't do what they call imaging, where you do a lot of computer work. Imaging is a combination of photography, astronomy, computer science, art. It's this very big, all-encompassing thing. If I could only keep one telescope, okay, really only one telescope, I would have an 8-inch SCT. Okay, that's, to me, is a pretty good size, and I would have it on that mount there, which is a Celestron AVX mount. And it's for bang for the buck for visual, it's probably one of the best mounts there is. It retails normally for $900. They're on sale for like $750, $800.
And that would be like,
You can
You
see
know,
pretty much
can't carry
anything,
more than
anything you want with
20
that within reason. I mean, they only have so much light gathering. So, I mean, Jim was in the back. We did a C8 challenge one night up on the hill, and I failed some of the tests. So I brought the C11 the next time, and I passed. So yeah, but I mean, a C8 is more than enough scope, depending what you want to look at.
Was I drawn into your orbit, or were you drawn into mine? In any case, you've given me a new reason to shine. The circles we're revolving, spinning recklessly around, growing tighter by the hour, till the flash and then the sound, and for a moment two are one, glowing with the brilliance of a multiplying sun. But even stars will one day fall, and I won't shed a tear, 'cause for a time we had it all. In a darker time I floated like a lantern in the sky, alone until the moment that I saw you flying by. I don't know where you came from or the way the wind will blow. I only know I'll follow you no matter where you go. And when the candles start to fade, slowly we'll descend, but I will never be afraid. And even as we start to fall, I won't shed a tear, 'cause for a time we had it all.